All right, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up this part of the Gilded Age and move into our second half of the Gilded Age in the next set of lectures. But we're going to begin with another election. And I don't love talking about elections because they're kind of dumb. Elections, they are what they are. But we're going to fly through this one and then kind of tell you the rest of the story of Hayes. Now, if you remember Hayes, he is the guy that won, quote unquote, won the election thanks to the Compromise of 1877. And in the build-up to the election of 1880, he has done such a terrible job as president that he has been so corrupt that he has not lived up to what he promised, that he has actually earned the nickname of Rutherford B. Hayes. Ha ha ha. Rutherford. And he's such a bad president as a Republican that the Republicans actually refuse to stand with him. And they go, yeah, he's like, I'm going to run again as a Republican. And the Republicans are like, no, you're not. I mean, you could run again, but we're not putting our name on you. You're terrible, right? And so, yeah, that's pretty bad. I mean, it's really bad. So instead, the Republicans decide they're going to choose a new candidate, and they're going to choose a wonderfully named James A. Garfield. And to make a, long story short, Garfield is a very powerfully, electorally speaking man. He comes from the state of Ohio, and which is a very important swing state, and it was then as well, and just as it is now. And he ends up running against Winfield Scott Hancock, which is a super old school white name for a presidential candidate. And so it's James Garfield, and his vice president is Chester A. Arthur, which these are great names. Anyways, Garfield ends up winning the election of 1880. Go Garfield, right? And this is kind of funny because, unfortunately, Garfield, when he wins, he gets assassinated by a guy named Charles J. Guiteau, who actually says, I am a stalwart, and Arthur is president now, which is kind of stupid. And, he goes back, and the idea of being a stalwart, he assassinated him because of the patronage system, the patron system, and he wanted to be he believed that the president was not going to represent his group of people that had basically been corruptly put in charge of things, right? He's we had paid off these other guys and we'd been getting the jobs that we wanted. And this guy says he's not going to do that anymore, so he's got to die. He's not going to be corrupt enough for us. I'll shoot him. So that's kind of crazy. And he just kills the president over basically a spoils system, which is, that's a pretty obvious red flag. That, here's the thing, it's so morally corrupt that somebody thinks that the only way to keep it that corrupt is to assassinate the president. And he honestly thought that this would get it back to the corruption that he was used to, which is kind of funny. It really does just define the Gilded Age in a way. But, that's not going to be what ends up happening. But realistically, one problem that they were facing is that, politicians, instead of having individual clients, they now have these big corporations funding them. And it's really going to reconfigure how we look at what the problem in politics is going to be. And it's also going to lead to major reform in the Republican Party. And it's really going to shift the Republican Party to look a lot more like it has all the way up until basically when Trump ran for president, where the Republican Party is really a party of pro-business and big business, and the Republicans kind of get this idea that, they're the party of the elite, and the Democrats are the party of the regular guy. And it's not until really President Trump, Bush tried to do it a little bit more, but even Bush was very big business. He was an oil guy, and he owned the Texas Rangers. Yeah, George W. Bush, President Bush, owned like the Texas Rangers, the baseball team. Yeah, he was like, that was like a present to him from his dad. But like, yeah, and so like, they were very much still like the Republican Party of big business. And that really started here in this Gilded Age. But anyway, the reform movements, they eventually kind of culminate and bring about this really big change in the next election that's going to take place. Now, that's going to happen with the election of this man, Grover Cleveland. Another fantastic name, Grover Cleveland. Now, Grover is, Grover the Good is kind of what he kind of becomes known as, Grover the Good. And that's reference to the fact that the previous era of politicians were so corrupt and that the election itself was actually really a low point of American politics because of how much mudslinging is going on between the two candidates. But at the end of the day, this guy, James Blaine, he ends up, he has everything a good politician needs except a good reputation. And he doesn't win, but, and he, you know, he's from a state that there's a lot of wealthy individual and he gets campaign financing and his reputation is terrible. So Grover Cleveland's able to take advantage of that. And again, they cast Grover Cleveland as Grover the Good in opposition to Blaine the Corrupt. And it becomes this sort of marketing campaign and ends up with him winning the next election. In a lot of ways, you also see things as, kind of Republicans who, are basically trying to consult the Irish segment of New York City, and then the Irish realize that it's kind of just a ploy, and so they decide, the entire Irish section of New York decides, no, we're not going to play into this game with you. We're going to vote for Grover Cleveland. And so he kind of wins, and that's kind of interesting how some of that takes place. As the first Democrat president in 28 years, he kind of becomes known as maybe even Super Grover. Right? Like, Super Grover. Hi, guys. I'm here to be president. What are you guys doing? Oh, I'm going to be a good president. Sorry. That's my Grover impression. It's not great, but it's better than most of y'all's, I'm sure. And he's viewed by some people as a hero, all kidding aside. He was a very strong man of principles. He favored businesses and banks. Now, that might sound like it may not favor the average person, but it actually does help to have healthy small businesses and healthy banks. And that's going to benefit everybody that voted for him. And he also vetoed some things that I think help the average American. And so I think Grover's presidency is really a hard one to evaluate fairly. Favoring the banks is good considering the panic of everything and everything that he's going to have to reform and that he has to support. But then he's also going to provide, seeds to people in drought-ravaged Texas, right? And so people are like, well, he supports banks, but he's also for the average person, He does support, a bigger government. But at the time, people are, thinking pretty strongly that, the government needs more oversight, that they need more ability to control themselves. And so people feel pretty strongly with him. He also kind of resonates with people who think about like the welfare system and how in the coming decades after this, the welfare is going to really skyrocket. He is also going to kind of be like, the government shouldn't just take care of you. And so that kind of resonates with a lot of people as well. And so Grover Cleveland, really, he's hit or miss a lot, but a lot of people think he's a really great president. What? Artists at the time have a little bit of fun with Grover's presidency, right? And this is kind of a depiction of him trying to navigate the troubled waters of, trying to navigate through the corruption and all of this while still trying to be a good president and not trying to grow the government too big, but trying to grow it big enough that it can take care of some of the things that it actually needs to. So it's a very mixed bag of, what he's able to accomplish. The most important thing that happens during all of this time period, later the Gilded Age, is actually the formation of something called the Farmers' Alliance and the Populist Party. And this begins with social economic movement, okay? And they initially, what they want and what they have is a coalition of agrarian reformers, like farmers throughout the Midwest and the South. They come together and they're going to try and educate people on a host of issues that are facing farmers in the late 19th century. And eventually that then turns into a group that is, they're going to try and get laws passed to help these down and out farmers, these agrarian folk, these people that are not living in the big cities. And they want to turn the government towards what they need. They felt like the government had now turned too much pro-business, that they had forgotten their roots, And so they're going to start trying to push for new policies and new laws, like the sub-treasury plan. They want to design a grain elevator conglomerate company in favor of, government-owned warehouses where they say, hey, the government should own the warehouses and then pay us to put grain there. And then that way the government's going to be able to control the price of grain better, which will make it go up, which will make us more profitable. And so realistically, they're in favor of the government really taking control of a lot of these industries in order for it to better regulate them. They thought that private companies and private businesses were making too much profit off the backs of agrarian folk. Unfortunately, that's a lot like socialism and communism, where they literally want the government to take over certain aspects of society. And that's really, the Populist Party was really interesting because they just felt like they were getting ripped off. And I actually, in my graduate school study stuff, I actually did an entire quarter just on the populist movement, and it is extremely deep and complex. And a lot of different sides that go into that. And one of the primary sources that I'm going to have you read and answer some questions about is to do with the Populist Party and what they declare as kind of their party platform as the third party of the United States. And they call it the Omaha Platform. And we're going to look at some of that, and I'll show some of that to you. And I made a video that kind of reads through it and discusses it with you and gives you some questions to answer. And I'm probably going to let you do that. I might assign that at the end of class. And so, anyways, this Populist Party is a really, really big change. And it's very different, and it takes on a different form than any of the other, kind of conglomerates that had come together before it. And they really embrace the idea of a political movement and trying to make changes from the inside of the government and really do a good job, actually. We can actually see some of the captured Farmers Alliance meetings here in Florida in 1890. You can see it's a pretty large group, and there's not much else to make in this picture, but I'm just showing you that we do have really great records of groups and what they're doing in their meeting and attempting to achieve. And again, it's about standardizing these crisis items for the farmers and building alliances so that they can have a better shake at it. They feel like they've been left out. The Populist Coalition will grow further from there. It's where people really important like this can be, involved in these left out people can be involved in a big movement that is centered around them. They are tired of the current system, the corruption. You actually have blacks and whites in the South in the 1880s, 90s, early 1900s, blacks and whites working together. They brought women in because they realized everybody is getting kind of raked over the coals by these big banks and businesses. black people and white people can work together. Now, there's some controversy on that, as well as how much did the leaders of the movement really care about black interests, or were they just kind of using them as a voting bloc, because one of the major leaders then goes on and becomes one of the biggest racists in the entire state of Georgia, but in the history of Georgia, political range. But it's much bigger, and it shows that the sphere of this discontent has really grown bigger than just one aspect of life, one group of people. Lots of people felt left out. They aspire to be a national party. They want to challenge the Republicans and Democrats, who they say are not representing the farmers, and then they add in the laborers as well. They also say different minority groups, but they really aren't able to pull it off. Western farmers really kind of, that Western farmers and Southern farmers are not really involved in it. They're also really afraid that if they, most of the people that support the Populist Party are Democrats, and they're afraid, they don't believe that there's enough support to really rival against the Democrats, and if they give their support to the populists and then the Democrats fail and the Republicans take back over, then what's going to happen? So they really do struggle to get a huge following to make a major impact. There was a lot of them that didn't find the white and black intermixing of politics really sustainable. They didn't think that was going to work very well. They're terrified on these racial grounds, and that kind of works out very strange. But if you look at some of the things that they wanted to do, these, like the direct election of senators, where you actually get to vote for your own senator, that was not a thing. They were one of the first groups that actually brought this up. Again, they ultimately fail, and they're considered one of the big failures and a big turning point in American history. They want federal control of railroads and telephones and telegraphs, which is kind of crazy at the time, because that's communism. You don't want the government taking over all the businesses and controlling everything. They're a big proponent of the sub-treasury plan. They want unlimited coining of gold and silver, so that there's more money on the market, so that prices will go up. They also want a graduated income tax. There was no personal income tax, and they said there should be a graduated income tax, which is what we have today. They said the more money you make, the more tax you should pay. That was a revolutionary idea. So of all the things that they want done, some of them eventually do end up happening. But they also want a ban on immigrants. Like, no more immigrants, period. Now, if you understand, these are farmers, and they see immigrants as a threat to their job, because immigrants will come in and work for cheaper than we do. They'll work because they came from zero, and they'll work for cheap. So they're saying that that's diluting the labor market and all this stuff. And so some of the planks that they want, it's kind of difficult to wrap your head around. But like I said, ultimately the most influential election that they took part in was 1892. A guy named James Weaver runs on the populist presidential platform. He ends up getting 22 electoral votes and over 1 million popular votes. And he actually wins 4 different states. But you really have Grover Cleveland running against Harrison, and the populists don't win that election, but they do make a sizable dent. But it's the closest they ever get to winning any kind of election. Ultimately, the Democrats and Cleveland carry not only the southern states, but also northern states like New York and Illinois. You have cities like New York and Chicago that are voting Democrat for the first time, and he wins convincingly. But Weaver does kind of, show that, hey, maybe we can challenge this two-party system. But nobody in the urban areas really sees populism as meaningful. The populist viewpoints and the populist ideas don't really affect urban people. It's only rural people. And by this point, all the population is moving into urban areas. And so now you only have 30-40% of the country living in rural areas. They're fighting for things that affect rural people. And all the people living in cities are like, y'all are just backward thinking idiots that want to take us back away from industrialization, back to an agrarian society. Y'all are idiots. We're not doing this. We're not voting for this. Y'all need to just get with the times. You could make the argument that, though, if you look at those party planks, those are things that are eventually going to happen. You could actually say that the populists were ahead of their time. So the people in the cities are going, oh, y'all are thinking backwards. And the populists are going, no, y'all are not thinking far enough forward. So it's kind of an interesting way to look at how these two groups saw each other. Ultimately, they don't end up gaining any more support, and the whole thing falls apart. But many of the pillars of populism, like I said, if you go back to those, a lot of these end up actually happening. And so were they effective? Were they not effective? That's kind of what, in the long run, that's kind of what your primary source questions are going to be about on that is, you know, what are they fighting against? How vastly different are what they're doing versus what they see happening, and why did they feel that way? And were they actually successful in the end? So, yeah, by the turn of the 1900s, there's going to be a new sort of optimism. What can technology achieve? What is America heading into? And so that's what we're going to kind of get into in the next set of lectures that kind of are going to tie in with this module. Okay? Thanks.